Okay, good morning everybody. I think quite a few of you know me already. I've just been fantastically introduced by the wonderful Hannah, who probably speaks better than I do, but I'm going to try my best nonetheless. So what I'd like to talk to you about is obviously the UK fashion consumption. I'm going to do the facts and figures as well. I'm also going to link it to my research because I'm very interested in these systems that we keep mentioning. And the reason I've called this presentation a broken system that we can fix is that over the years when I started looking at sustainability, I had that, or started off with that ambivalence that people have where you read the facts and you see the figures and the amount of stuff we waste and what we throw away and all those sorts of things, and you kind of think, what can I actually do to help solve this problem? And as I've started to study systems and understand them more and pick them apart in my academic research, I've really convinced myself that we can actually fix the system that we're talking about. So we do have a broken system, but I do think that we can fix it, and that's the positive message I want to kind of leave you with. And I'll try and answer that question towards the end of the presentation. But we'll start with the facts and figures. So, a couple of years ago, this was M&S's launch of their swapping initiative, which was in partnership with Oxfam. And they have an art installation, or launched it with this art installation here, which was 9,513 pieces of clothing put on these buildings, which I think was in Shoreditch. This represents 5 minutes worth of what the UK throws away as an illustration for that. And we've got a very similar model to the US. So I used RAPS figures because I was talking with Carrie about this, and we're not quite sure about these figures last night on the taxi on the way back. But essentially, we have an import model as well. About 68% of the clothing that we get is imported. And we've had the same impact on that, which is because we don't make our clothing in the UK very much anymore. We've lost around 52% of the textiles and fashion jobs since 2000, which constitutes a lot of jobs considering that we're already a struggling economy, or we were moved into a recession post that. So we spend 44 billion a year annually on clothing. That's US dollars, that's 68 billion. So we're not quite on the same scale as the US, but then again, we are a very small island in comparison. So our consumption per capita is very, very similar. So carbon footprint for our industry here, 38 million tonnes of CO2. And what that equates to is with our smaller houses. I've tried to pick out an average house, but this is obviously still a detached. Most of us live in semis or terraces, but it still constitutes 1.5 tonnes of CO2 per household. There's 26 million of those in the UK. And if you're wondering about, again, equivalence of that, it's like driving a car constantly for 3 days without stopping, or leaving your television on for an entire year. So that's the impact on that one. Now, with water consumption, obviously we know that it takes between 10,000 and 20,000 litres of water to make around about a kilogram of cotton. We recently, obviously, had a wonderful time in Buffalo. So we got to see Niagara Falls, not quite like this. It was actually frozen because it was -20 when we were there. But we use about 6,300 million cubic metres of water in our fashion production in the UK. And that constitutes 6 minutes of the water that falls over Niagara Falls. So you've got to stand in front of it and count 6 minutes to see the amount of water. And if that doesn't hit home, it's the equivalent of filling up your bath every day at home to the brim 3 times for a year. So what impact does that have? Well, a lot of, we've mentioned in the big issue yesterday that a lot of our cotton comes from Uzbekistan. And this is the Aral Sea over in Uzbekistan that's been diverted for a lot of cotton irrigation, for irrigating the cotton crops there. And as we know, we just said cotton's very thirsty, so you can see what's happened to it since 1977. So it's now down to a trickle. And if you wonder what that looks like on the ground, there's quite a lot of pretty stunning pictures of what it looks like, because as we emptied it, we left a lot of boats and things behind, so a lot of people had their livelihoods based on this sea. And then we come to the waste end of this, where we've got what we throw away. So we throw away about 1.8 million tonnes of useful materials a year, or useful textiles a year. The UK is a little bit better than the US in terms of the fact that we do, because we're a smaller country and we are quite, recycling has become quite fashionable. We do send a lot of our stuff, you know, to Oxfam, to banks. We do take it to local recycling plants that are fairly conveniently placed in the UK. And there are a lot of charities that do curbside pickup, similar to the US. So that means a lot of our stuff doesn't go to landfill. So even when it goes to incineration, a lot of the incinerators in the UK now produce energy, so there's kind of a little bit of balance going there. But 20% of what we throw out still goes to landfill. And the big problem with that is that cotton is an organic material, so when it starts to rot, it releases methane. And methane is 72 times, has 72 times more impact as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So that 20% going to landfill is still doing an awful lot of damage in the UK. So how do I connect this to the systems that I'm interested in? And what I wanted to do is try and bring this back to the UK and specifically to Manchester to show how our consumption impacts on what we do in our daily lives. So we've got institutions. We've got social and personal institutions. And those institutions are essentially socially accepted ways of doing things. And companies are very good at either setting up these institutions or using them to get you to work for them. So you'll probably be aware that the way we shop in supermarkets is very much an institution. When you go in there, you're almost like a rat in a lab, following that exact route that they'd like you to take around the supermarket. And it's very, very similar with fashion. Companies have trained us to go in, to expect cheap prices, to buy very high volumes of stuff. So how many of you have got Apple phones in here? Okay. Oh, loads of you. Okay, so what a fantastically designed institution that is. Very easy to get into, very easy to access. But once you've been using it for a little while, very difficult to get out of. Okay, so you've got to buy things with their plugs on it, you've got to buy your music from iTunes, you've got to buy your apps from their store, and they lock you in to that system very successfully, and that is designed very successfully. And of course, so is this system. So fast fashion, for example, has been around since the late 90s. And what companies have done is construct institutions around that and train you to enjoy and focus on cheap clothing, easily bought and conveniently bought. And what those institutions create is new behaviours, new companies, new ways of doing things, despite the fact that we could discuss, or have discussed a lot, that it's quite irresponsible. So companies resist change as a result of this, because what they do, just like Apple, is they sink costs into this system. So when we ask them to change, when we turn around and say we'd like to be more sustainable, that investment means that they resist doing that as long as possible. And what it can be likened to is trying to teach an old dog new tricks. Now, so businesses are quite a lot like human beings. So you start off young, and you learn something, you learn a way of doing it, and you invest in that, so you go to university and learn about it. And you learn the technologies around it, you learn the systems around it, and then you get a bit older and new things start to happen. So you start off with, as these new things happen, you kind of become that person who's doing old things in old ways, and perhaps you learn some new stuff. So you kind of end up doing old things in new ways. You know, so if you lived before this IT generation, you'll know what I'm talking about, because I'm starting to get to that cusp now. I've just got myself onto Twitter for the first time for this project. I've avoided it for as long as possible, and it's like a whole new world has been opened up to me with people that I never knew connecting to me and all those sorts of things. But the point is that a little bit like us, if you've ever tried to teach any of your grandparents something to do with this IT revolution, it becomes very difficult. So companies get stuck in their ways, just like old people do. And just like the older generation, they die after that, which is a terrible thing to say. But that is what companies do. They invest in stuff, they learn how to do something really well, and for a time that really works for them, and then they get overtaken. And then at that point, that's the end. Yeah? And so what I'm really interested in is that I think we're right, well, at the moment we're here, which is fast fashion was taking stuff that we've done before, so old things, and doing it in a new way. And what I'm interested in with sustainability in particular is doing new things in new ways, and I think that will kill some of these companies that we're looking at now, or I sincerely hope it does, and I'll try and explain why that's going to happen in a minute. But let's look at Manchester a little bit more. So this institution that we're talking about trains us to herald the arrival of businesses like Louis Vuitton or Harvey Nicks, and get very excited about streets like this in Manchester. So these are photos that I went out and took. They're also, well, all these areas are designed with this system in mind. So if I look at the square that Harvey Nichols is in, you'll see that it's very much designed to flow or to move you towards that area of consumption. And you can kind of sit down if you want to, but it's not designed to be particularly comfortable. It's not a community-based area, you know, and you're going to stop there and have a picnic. And it's also designed to make sure that the people that they don't want in that area can't come. So if I'm a homeless person who'd like a little bit of a nap, I'm not doing it here, yeah? And neither am I going skateboarding or biking or anything else interesting in this area that is supposed to be a public space. So, and the fine for skateboarding in Spinningfields, by the way, is £1,000, yeah? Okay, which is more than, you know, so when I got done for speeding, it was cheaper, okay? So retail does have a positive impact on cities sometimes. So if we look at Cannon Street, this is Cannon Street, or was Cannon Street in Manchester, which is now the bolt-on bit of the Arndale, and this is what it looked like before that, okay, which is kind of a bit 60s and dark, so maybe it does have a bit of a positive impact. But this is Starbucks inside that retail area, and again, I really wonder about ownership here. You know, so I can't just sit down like a free person. Apparently we're free in this country. Can I not just sit down, or do I have to buy a coffee? I have to be part of it. And maybe you don't necessarily agree with the Arndale Centre, this development of the Arndale Centre, but let's just have a look at Piccadilly Gardens here. So this is after its regeneration, and you can sort of see these kind of what I call consumption pathways going through the garden to keep you moving, and make sure you stop at Pizza Express or whatever on the way. Not designed to be very comfortable or anything like that. Let's have a look at what it looked like before that. That was kind of nice. Somewhere you could stop, somewhere you could talk to people, somewhere you could relax. And this is it in the autumn. Kind of brightens up Manchester a bit, doesn't it? From that dark kind of Piccadilly feeling. I tend to walk a little bit faster through Piccadilly Gardens, I don't know about you. And here we are with the anti-skateboarding, anti-biking, kind of like little bits of metal on, if you've ever wondered what they're for. So to prevent anybody any good at skateboarding from doing grinding, I'm told. Okay. Now there's an app for that. Okay, and then we've got the bench there as well, again designed not to allow you to rest or stop, to keep shopping, to keep spending. And what I'm also interested in is how heavily watched these areas are as well. So when I was taking these photos, particularly in the Harvey Nicks area, I took that street picture, the one with sort of Reese in the background on it, and the manager from, well no, actually first of all the retail assistant from Hugo Boss came out. I was standing in the street and said, "You can't take photos here." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I don't know, you just can't." And so we said, so I had a little bit of an argument with him, because I thought, no, I'm going to stand my ground here, thanks very much. And so his manager came out and said, "You can't take photos here." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because in the background you're getting our clothes and our brand." And I said, "But you're displaying your brand," you know, so this went on for some time. And eventually he basically accepted that he didn't know why he was asking me either not to take photos. It was just a company policy. And again, these are these institutions. So these little CCTV cameras are everywhere. And if that really doesn't get you, this will, which is, this is a store that I think a few of us are probably familiar with in Manchester. And again, I felt a little bit uncomfortable about taking a photo of it inside, but I did manage to kind of sneak one. And so that's what it looks like inside. And if you've been in, I'd imagine most of you here have been in. It's got 3 floors, one in the basement, etc. Anybody ever been onto the top floor? You think so, wouldn't you? Or you would think so. This is what the top floor of that building looks like. Oh, right, okay. So, but a lot of people don't know that. And I'm not kidding, because you can just about see, or if I lose the Google satellite there, there's the top of the dome there on the top floor. So really our urban spaces and things like that through these institutions don't need to be like that. They can be a little bit nicer. And so what I was interested in, or what I have been interested in, is the fact that in answer to the question, can we change, can we redesign this system, redevelop it? Obviously, yes, we can, because this system that we're talking about, this institution that we are stuck in at the moment, was designed. And this is part of that redesign. So I'm just going to give you a second to read this. This was an economist, an American economist called Victor Lebeau. And he wrote this extract of this journal for the Journal of Retailing in 1955 when they were deciding or working on how to ramp up both the American and UK economies post-war. And I've highlighted a couple of sections which kind of illustrate our contemporary system that we've been kind of stuck in for about 60 years, which was this one. These commodities and services must be offered to the consumer with a special urgency. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced and discarded at an ever-increasing pace. And we've also got that constantly more expensive consumption. And I would say that there are 2 issues with that constantly more expensive consumption. If we go back to the mobile phone example for 2 seconds, how much was your first mobile phone? I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 pounds? How much was your iPhone 6? Ouch, okay. But the other one, or the more important one, is that prices have actually been driven down. I'll show you why in a second. But this constantly more expensive consumption, it's at the expense of the people that we know about who are working very hard to produce fashion for us. So yes, we get wonderfully cheap prices, but that expensive consumption is at the expense of resources. It's at the expense of our culture, because we're just installing rather boring retail areas that are all about shopping. It's at the expense of the environment in general and our health, in fact, because we have to work a lot harder in order to pay for all this stuff that we like. So this was that traditional mainstream economic thought, which is that it's unlimited growth is both possible and desirable, and it's still the thing that we're told is vitally important when we go into a recession. And that was in 1971 when we thought resources were, were forever. It was before we learned that these resources were finite and that they would eventually run out. And the idea is that this creates wealth, and it also creates an enormous amount of choice for us. So I'm going to shamelessly steal something from a presentation that I saw by a chap called William McDonough, and I'll talk about him in just a second. But let's look at a design brief here for a product. So we want to reduce violence, denote seasons, clean air, create economic opportunities, offer shelter, save and clean water, absorb harmful UV rays, increase property values, self-repair, needs to self-repair, provide habitat for wildlife, last over 100 years, and everybody's got to love it. That's a pretty difficult brief. Yep, I think some of you got it already. That's a tree. I stole that from William McDonough's presentation, and he wrote Cradle to Cradle Design. If you've not read it, fantastic book to read. The reason there's a woman in a bath reading it is that the book is made from a permanently recyclable or an infinitely recyclable polymer that's waterproof. So you can read it in the shower, in a puddle, whatever you'd like to do. But essentially what we do with those trees, this commodification thing, is that we cut those down and save the trees on them and make them into paper and all those sorts of things. And commodification is the other thing that's really important in this system that we're talking about, which is to convert unsaleable things into something saleable, like water. And there I was thinking that was a basic human right. But it gets a little bit daft with fashion. So here I've got, regardless I've put, I think, on this one of its importance or rarity. So here's something pretty important, elephants. I'm not going to talk about the ivory trade associated with this. I'm going to talk about Jay-Z's elephant Nike high tops. So you can see the elephant skin here. And this is the luxury company that made them, Brooklyn Zoo. This is Anaconda at the front here, and Stingray leather, and I can't remember some of the others. But this is that commodification thing, and here's Beyonce's that went with them as well. And this is quite an extreme example of this commodification of things, but essentially illustrates what this system is capable of. It is capable of disregarding the importance of anything in the pursuit of profit. And it also creates an awful lot of choice, which makes our lives actually quite stressful. You know, when you go and buy a chocolate bar or whatever, you've got 27 decisions to make in that space of time. So just while I'm talking about this, what's scrolling past is this season's t-shirt options for menswear on Zara. There are 128 options. Do I really need 128? I haven't got time for 128 options, never mind actually looking through all of them. If you go on to ASOS, ASOS have got 2,667 available men's t-shirts at the moment. 2,667 I clocked on the search. Yeah, for that. And that's .co.uk, not .com. So I'd imagine there's a few others on .com as well. Oh, is this going to skip? There we go. So have we got better at making things as a result of this system? Yes, we have. Okay, so in 1910 we had to use 280 grams of materials per dollar to create something on average. So this is materials intensity. This is how much material you have to put into the system to get something out. So you can see by 2000 we're only using 75 grams per dollar. So what that means in real terms is that if I take something that used to be very large and inefficient, like this old computer here, it means that we've dematerialized, so we make more with less. We make them more powerful, we make them more efficient. But the problem with that is that it drives prices down. It allows economies of scale, so it makes things cheap. So unfortunately, what that means is, in comparison to our extraction in 1900 at the same time, our global extraction in 2010 is much larger. And the efficiency is to do with automation. on this. So we've been able to automate a lot of processes, but unfortunately not with fashion, because we still know that it is extremely labour intense. It needs to use human capital in order to produce its stuff. So this is a Canadian photographer called Edward Beninsky, who did a fantastic series of photos called Manufactured Landscapes. And this is one of the Chinese workhouses with a factory attached that you'll see in a second. And this is them on their break in the morning in between shifts, queuing up to wait to go into the factory. You can see how far it goes back. And this is the factory that they work in, and that's not a illusion in terms of the scale of the photograph. Apparently, one of his innovations is the fact that he's able to get scale into this sort of thing. So what we've had to do with fashion is drive down wages in order to get that efficiency. And we all know about things. It's been said a couple of times, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but you know, these poor labour practices lead to things like Rana Plaza. This is a photo called The Embrace that was widely published at that time. And I was having a look at War on Want's webpage the other day. If you've not seen it, it's an organisation concerned with this sort of thing. And they've just done a review of the companies involved in that incident. And they're saying that 2 years on, the factory workers in Bangladesh are still doing an 80-hour week, despite the fact that that's illegal in Bangladesh now because they introduced law around that. And those are Asda, Tesco and Primark, not surprisingly. And what I'm interested in with this system that brings it back to you is the fact that this system is all about temporary happiness. It's just about that quick purchase, and after that you forget about it. So it's that quick moment of joy that it produces when you've purchased something. It's about throwaway quality, and as a result of the efficiencies that we need to make to keep that price low, it's about duplicated artifact, and it's about conformity. So what that leads to is the fact that a lot of the fashion that I see now is just boring, highly standardised, grey, miserable, particularly as menswear. For menswear, I kind of feel like a clone unless I'm spending lots of money, and this was a fashion photographer illustrating that earlier this year. So what we need to get away from is this idea of newness. So you can see that all the tonnage that we were talking about in the UK in terms of our carbon footprint basically comes from the production end of our supply chain. And the issue with that is that it's this constant newness that we demand that means that new stuff has to be made. So cotton has to be extracted, new stuff has to be made continuously, and the impact of that is enormous, as well as the waste associated with continuously throwing it away. So the point on this for me is that we see a lot of images like this, the impact of the environmental changes that are going on and all those sorts of things. Essentially, those images are very important to us, but they don't impact directly on us. So there's this easy thing to do, which is to see it on the news and then think, oh, you know. So we see awful things all the time, and it doesn't really change our lives or affect us directly. But this does, which is, this system really doesn't make us very happy. It makes us rather miserable. And you can see that from the countries that don't participate as much as we do in this system. They're having a lot nicer time than us. And I think that's because, you know that moment that everybody says you get just before you snuff it? Which is like you get your life flashed before your eyes. I've talked a lot about death in this, sorry. But I figured that I reckon that you do get that moment, you know, where all the good things or bad things that have happened in your life flash before your eyes just before you get hit by the bus. I'm really wondering, am I going to remember that bargain that I got in H&M that made me happy for a second? Or am I going to remember spending 2 weeks on holiday in Africa with my mum and dad, which was brilliant? Or am I going to remember the family dog, Millie, And this is because she's super cute, couldn't resist putting her in on the presentation. And essentially those are the things that I'm going to remember. So what I would suggest about this is what we need to do in the UK, it's what we need to do everywhere. We need to extend the useful life of our clothing, reduce the environmental impacts of laundry, so start washing cold. It does work, I've been doing it for ages. You don't need to have it on 40 degrees. And wash a bit less, okay? And we need to increase the supply and demand for pre-owned clothing. That is particularly the important thing to avoid that front-end damage that we are doing with the demand for constant newness on that. So I've got a little bit of a list of things you can do here. But what I will finish on very, very quickly, because I'm nearly out of time, is this. This is an economist called Carlota Perez. She advises the UN. And she came up with the concept that every so often societies go through waves of change, big waves of change. The last one we had is the information and telecommunications wave, which we've been experiencing for a little while. And once you come to the end of that installation period, so we're very digitized, heavily digitized, you get a crash, which is the one that's just happened, where there's instability in the market, difficulties, and things need reinventing. Institutions need reinventing. And because collapses cause businesses to think in different ways. So we're right here, and this collapse and readjustment always is indicated in economics by a recession. So we're seeing recessions all over the world. So we are right here at the moment with what to do next. And I firmly believe that the next deployment period, which is where you change the system, change the institutions, because we are talking about it so much, it has to be sustainability and environmental business systems and new institutions that are about sustaining the way we do things. So in answer to the question, a broken system, can we fix it? I really believe that if we look at this and we get the thinking, and universities get involved in projects like this, and businesses start to reinvent their systems, and we talk about it a lot more and make sure we drive it forward, and it's you guys as students that are going to be doing that, that we can really change this system that is now broken and good for no one. Thank you very much.